It's 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Your alarm goes off. You don't hit snooze. You can't afford to. You have a 9 to 5 that pays you $31,000 a year, which breaks down to $14.90 an hour, which breaks down to 24 cents a minute. You know this because you did the math. You did the math because at $31,000, every minute feels like it should count for something. You're not broke. You want to be clear about that. You have a checking account. You have a debit card that works most of the time. You have a $400 emergency fund that you've rebuilt 3 times this year. But you are not free. And somewhere, quietly, you know it. Establish the core tension. At $30,000 a year, your mindset isn't about wealth. It's about subtraction. Every decision is a trade-off. The gym membership or the phone bill. The dentist or the car payment. You don't budget, you survive. And surviving, after a while, starts to feel like a personality. Here's what nobody tells you about $30,000 a year in America. The math always feels personal. Like the universe specifically designed it to be $47 short every single month. Rule number 1. At $30,000, money is emotion. It lives in your chest, not in a spreadsheet. Crossing $50,000, then something shifts. Maybe you got a promotion. Maybe you changed jobs. Maybe you started taking on freelance work at night while your roommates watched TV. Whatever it was, you cross $50,000 a year, and for the first time, money stops feeling like an emergency. It doesn't feel like wealth. Don't mistake that. $50,000 a year in America is still paycheck to paycheck for millions of people. But for you, in this moment, it feels like oxygen. Like you finally surfaced. Rule number 2. $50,000 is not comfort. It's the first moment you can think clearly about money instead of just feeling it. Crossing $75,000. At $75,000, your mindset does something strange. It starts to argue with itself. One part of you relaxes. You can cover your bills. You can go out to dinner without doing math in your head. You can say yes to the weekend trip without a week of guilt after. But the other part of you, the part that remembers $31,000, starts watching people who make $150,000. And you feel the same thing you felt at $30,000 looking at $75,000. That quiet hunger. That sense that there's a room you're not yet allowed into. Crossing $100,000, 6 figures. You get there. You remember the first time you typed it into a salary calculator and felt your pulse quicken. $100,000 a year. And then you get your first paycheck, and you see the number after taxes, and you sit with it. Quietly. Because nobody prepared you for the fact that $100,000 a year is about $6,200 a month take-home in most states. And that's before rent, before student loans, before anything. The milestone didn't move the feeling. The feeling just moved to the next milestone. Rule number 3. Every income level carries its own version of not enough. The number changes. The feeling doesn't, unless your mindset does. Crossing $150,000. At $150,000, something structural changes in your thinking. Not emotional, structural. You stop thinking about money as something you earn. You start thinking about it as something you engineer. You start having conversations about tax strategy, about maxing your 401k, about whether your savings account is actually losing value against inflation every single month it sits there doing nothing. You start meeting people at $150,000 who are miserable, and people at $150,000 who feel like they've cracked a code. And the difference isn't the number. It's what they decided the number was for. Rule number 4. $150,000 is where money becomes a tool. The question is, what are you building? Crossing $200,000. $200,000. This is where your social world starts to quietly reorganize. You're invited to different rooms now. Golf trips, investment conversations. The kind of dinners where someone at the table owns something, a business, a building, a portfolio. And you notice that the people around that table don't talk about money the way people at $50,000 talk about money. They don't talk about saving. They talk about deploying. They don't ask, "Can I afford this?" They ask, "What does this cost me in terms of time and opportunity?" That is a different language, and you are just starting to learn it. The isolation begins. Here is something nobody warns you about at $200,000 a year. You go home for the holidays. Your cousins are talking about their jobs, their hours, their commutes, the boss who doesn't appreciate them. And you listen, and you care. But there's a growing part of you that can't quite translate your world back into theirs. You can't explain why you turned down a job that paid $30,000 more because the equity wasn't structured right. You can't explain why you're stressed about your tax bracket, because to them, those sound like problems from another planet. And they are. That's the quiet cost nobody puts in the brochure. Rule number 5. As income rises, the gap between your internal world and your old social world widens. That's not success. That's just math. What you do with that gap, that's character. Crossing $250,000. At $250,000 a year, your relationship with time completely transforms. You used to trade time for money. Now you are deciding which parts of your time are worth money and which parts are worth protecting. You start paying for things you used to do yourself, not because you're lazy, but because an hour of your focused energy is now genuinely worth more than the task you're outsourcing. You hire someone to clean your apartment. You pay for the direct flight. You tip generously and don't feel guilt about it. These aren't luxuries. These are decisions about where your mental bandwidth lives. Crossing $350,000. At $350,000 a year, the game changes again, but not in the way you imagined it would when you were making $31,000. The houses are nicer, the car is quieter, the vacations are longer. But the stress doesn't disappear. It upgrades. Now you're stressed about equity vesting schedules, about your company's cap table, about whether you're building something or just earning something. Because at this level, earning feels increasingly like a ceiling. You start to see the people above you clearly, the ones at $500,000, at $1 million a year. And you realize they're not living on a different planet. They made a different set of decisions, earlier, with less information, and they stayed in the game long enough for those decisions to compound. Rule number 6. At $350,000, you can live extremely well. But the people above you aren't luckier. They're more patient, and they own things. Crossing $500,000. $500,000 a year. At this level, your mindset has to do something radical. It has to stop measuring itself against income and start measuring itself against ownership, impact, and time. Because $500,000 a year as an employee is still an employee. The company still owns your hours. The W-2 still arrives in January. You're comfortable, yes. You're secure, yes. But are you free? That question, that specific, haunting question, is what separates the people who stop at $500,000 and the people who use it as a launch pad. Rule number 7. $500,000 per year as a salary is a remarkable achievement. $500,000 per year from assets you own is a different kind of life entirely. What the money actually buys. Here is what the money actually buys at every level, and it is not what the commercials tell you. At $30,000, it buys relief from immediate panic. At $75,000, it buys the ability to think clearly. At $150,000, it buys optionality, the ability to choose. At $250,000, it buys your time back in small portions. At $500,000, it asks you a question. What are you actually trying to build? The answer to that question is the only thing that matters now. It's 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Somewhere, a 24-year-old's alarm is going off. They're making $31,000 a year. They're doing the math. $14.90 an hour, 24 cents a minute. They have a $400 emergency fund they've rebuilt 3 times this year. And they are sitting with the same feeling you sat with. That quiet, persistent, slightly desperate sense that there is a version of their life where the math works out differently. They're right. There is. But it doesn't start with the income. It starts with the mindset about the income. It starts with understanding that money at every level is just a set of decisions wearing a different costume. And the people who figure that out early, not perfectly, not without mistakes, but early enough to stay in the game and keep making better decisions, those are the people who look back from $500,000 a year and realize the journey was the point. The money was never the destination. It was the scoreboard for how clearly you were thinking. Final thought. The gap between $30,000 and $500,000 is not talent. It is not luck. It is a series of mindset shifts, compounding over time, made by someone who refused to let the current number become their final answer.